Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yadava Pranam, please accept my humble obeisances, Maharaj.
Is it set mine? All glories to Prabhupada.
All glories to you, Maharaj. Please, Maharaj, you can start. This is today's verse.
Okay. So let's have a look. Tell me, I've got to get onto. I'll just read it from the Bhagavatam here.
Okay, Maharaj.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, It's Canto 1, Chapter 6, text number 27. This is the conversation between Narad and Vyas. Yes, Dave. So I don't know how you usually do it, but I'll just read the verse myself, unless you have any other ideas.
You always have something to project.
And then I don't know how else it's going to work. Okay. Evan Krishna Mater Brahman Nasak. Do I leave a gap so that they can actually respond?
Yes, Maharaj, we will be responding behind the mic mix. If you mute everybody, the echo will be disturbing. So
I'll leave a gap between lines so that everybody can recite.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
Evan Krishna Mater Brahman Na Saktasya Malatmanaha Kala Pradurabutkale Taditso Sodamaniyata Evam, thus, Krishna Mate, one who is fully absorbed in thinking of Krishna, Brahman, or Vyasadeva. Na, not. Asaktasya, of one who is attached. Amala Atmanaha, of one who is completely free from all material dirt. Kalaha, death. Pradurabhut, become visible. Kale, in the course of time. Tadit, lightning. Sodamani, illuminating. Yata, as it is. Translation. And so, O Brahman, Vyasadeva, in due course of time, I, who was fully absorbed in thinking of Krishna, and who therefore had no attachments, being completely freed from all material taints, met with death as lightning and illumination occur simultaneously. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. To be fully absorbed in the thought of Krishna means clearance of material dirt or hankerings. As a very rich man has no hankering for small petty things, so also a devotee of Lord Krishna who is guaranteed to pass on to the kingdom of God, where life is eternal, fully cognizant and blissful, naturally has no hankerings for petty material things, which are like dolls or shadows of the reality and are without permanent value. That is a sign of spiritually enriched persons. And in due course of time, when a pure devotee is completely prepared, all of a sudden the change of body occurs, which is commonly called death. And for the pure devotee, such a change takes place exactly like lightning and illumination follows simultaneously. That is to say, a devotee simultaneously changes his material body and develops a spiritual body by the will of the Supreme. Even before death, a pure devotee has no material affection, due to his body's being purified like a red-hot iron in contact with fire. Om Gyan Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Sarasvati Devam Gauravani Prachadine Nirvisheshar Shunyavadi, Paschatadeshatayane. Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you for allowing me to, or engaging me in Lord Krishna's devotional service. So I say I'll just give a little overview of the Bhagavatam to this point. Sometimes we lose the thread when we get too much into the purports. But basically the Bhagavatam is very organized, and the first three verses actually are called like the introduction, prelude, I think they call the word prelude. And, first of all, the first verse establishes Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and gives, all the different, some of the different, Jiva Goswami, they quote from the Sandarbhas, and so it establishes the goal of the Vedas. And so this is Sambandha, we have to know where we're going. And then the second verse is called, is about Srimad Bhagavatam itself. What is the authority of this scripture? And, how it's the supreme scripture in all the world. And this is explaining the process, Abhideya. So now we've actually, confirmed the goal is authoritative, and the process over here in Bhagavatam is authoritative. And then finally, in the third verse, which is the end of the prelude, we talk about how we hear Srimad Bhagavatam, how the sages heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami, and how that by repeating, the subject matter became ever more relishable. So this is the process of disciplic succession, that we hear from our immediate authority who can make it relevant to us. If we try to hear sometimes from previous authorities, it's not so relevant because it's not spoken for time, place, and circumstance. And then the rest of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam gives the sages at Naimisharanya are asking 6 questions. So 6 questions. What are those questions? First one is, what is the essence of all scripture? Oh, sorry, that's the second one. What is the ultimate good for everybody? And that's answered in the second chapter. Sadhaipam sham paradharma yato bhaktir adokside ahaitaki apratihata yayatma suprasidati. That supreme occupation is that which brings us to the point of devotional service. Whatever it may be, if it's bringing us to the point of devotional service, then that's a good occupation, in other words. Second question. Please explain the essence of all the scriptures. What's the essence? Bhakti Yoga. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojata. And such service must be a high degree and a pratihata to be fully effective. So unmotivated, pure devotional service. Then the sages ask, why did Krishna appear in this world? So these are all the basic questions, in the womb of Devaki. So this is answered later in the second chapter, that he appeared to actually attract those who are in the mode of goodness. So, everybody in the world is, in civilized life means bringing people actually to the mode of goodness, controlling our life, controlling our senses. Otherwise, we can't focus on anything. So, religious principles bring us to the mode of goodness. And then we can actually understand Bhagavatam. So Krishna appeared to actually, when once one comes to that platform, Krishnas can actually help that person through his devotees to become absorbed in devotional service. That's why Krishna appears. Question 4, sorry. He talks about the adventures in the different incarnations of the Lord. Sometimes this can be a bit confusing because the next question is talk about the multi-incarnations. It seems like the same question. But actually, Jiva Goswami explains that the first question is in text 17 of the first chapter. It talks about the Purusha avatars. And so then that's answered in the third chapter. End of the second chapter, this is answered about the activities of the Purusha avatars, and also at the end of the third chapter. And then in verse 18, it talks about the multi-incarnation. That means Leela avatars, the pastimes of the Lord. So those are outlined in the third chapter. It gives a list of all the incarnations. So all these questions are answered in the first canto. And then the final question is, where do we go now for religious principles now Lord Krishna has left? So at this point, Lord Krishna has left this world, and the sages are asking, how do we get? And, this is answered also in the third chapter at the end. Krishna spadama bhagate yana jana dibisaha kalunasta tushnesha purna unadoditaha. They're in the Bhagavatam. Now Krishna's left. It's a shining light of knowledge. And so this is the foundation, setting the foundation for the Bhagavatam. And then we come to the fourth chapter, which this is the beginning of the writing of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the fourth chapter, there are 3 questions. What are those 3 questions? How was the Bhagavatam written? Where? How? Who inspired it? So, it was written by Vyasadeva. He sat down for meditation, seeing the age of Kali, and he tried to actually make he organized the 4 Vedas, which were spoken by the Lord to Brahma. It was spoken in a disordered way. So he started to organize the Vedas, and he gave them to his sons the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda. And then, he also wrote the Mahabharata and all the ancillaries to the Vedas, but he still wasn't satisfied. So at that point, Narada Muni came and gave him the guidance he needed. He says, you haven't spoken about Krishna. Therefore, people will be misled into, following the lower process of spiritual life. And eventually they'll become diverted. And then he explains about this question about when there was inspiration, was it compiled? We just said it was Narad's and Vyasadev's. And, it's spoken by Shukadeva Goswami. Shukadeva Goswami, he was an impersonalist in the beginning. He was in the womb of his mother, and he was self-realized. And therefore he thought he didn't want to come out into the material world, so he remained there for 16 years. But when he eventually was inspired to leave the womb, Vyas was his father, so Vyas taught him the personal understanding of spiritual life through the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he studied Bhagavatam under Vyasadeva. And like that. So what's the second question? The second question that's asked in this 4th chapter is, what about the Maharaj Parikshit? We heard in the first canto how, he was cursed to die, and a little bit about his pastimes. So this is mentioned, elaborating on that. First the speaker, and then the hearer, and then the subject matter, the Bhagavatam we've covered so far. So it's a history. If we hear from somebody, we want to know something about where the information came from. What's the person's qualification? Who are the persons? What's the storyline? Where was it spoken? So these are all delineated in these chapters. And all these first few cantos. Sorry, first few chapters. It's explained how, he was tried to, Ashvatthama tried to kill him in the womb, how he came and he captured Kali, he conquered Kali, and now, he's being cursed, and so now he realizes this must be the Lord's will. So he sits down to hear about the goal of life from Sukadeva Goswami. And finally, it talks about Sukadeva Goswami himself. When he appeared, just before the speaking, how was he received? And we hear how the common people, especially the women and the young boys, because he was dressed naked, they all thought he was a madman, and they were actually mocking him. But then when he came to the association of the sages, and they all stood up and offered the obeisances, they realized that, whoa, wait a minute, we actually shouldn't be doing this. And so the sages received him with great awe and veneration and asked further questions, which are spoken about. Or should I say, Maharaj Parikshit began to ask questions about the goal of life at the end of the first canto. So anyway, now we're on to the... So then, in the 5th chapter, Narad explains to Vyasadeva about the process of devotional service and how he took it up. And then, so in the 6th chapter, this is what we're talking about now, actually, is that, and then we've come to the point now where he says, he'd heard from the sages, he'd served them, he'd actually travelled and well, this is in the next chapter actually, but he's explaining briefly how he became Narada Muni. And he says he left his body in that particular lifetime fully purified, just as lightning and illumination occur simultaneously. So, in other words, there's no actual death for a devotee as such. We hear in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, according to one's mentality and activities, how one is transferred from one body to another, and sometimes there's a process of, training the person up for the next body. So it's a painful process, painful leaving the body, painful being reorientated for a new birth, and then pain in the womb. But that doesn't exist for a pure devotee. We're actually engaged in service, and that's all. And then all of a sudden we're engaged in service in another realm, in Krishna's realm, or wherever Krishna wants us to be. So this is a life of eternity. There's no pain, no death. So we can speak a little bit about the verse. Now we've had a preamble. I hope it wasn't too confusing. Basically in this, from 4 to 6, we're talking about, the writing of the Bhagavatam, Vyasadev's confusion, Narad's instructions, and then, how Narad explained about the process that he followed in order to become Narada Muni, and now he's explained how when he heard from the sages how, at the end of his life, due to that knowledge, he left his body. So the iron in fire is a very good example that, next bit of instruction explains about how the body of a pure devotee may be full of material imperfections. And, in the material world, everybody judges others by these imperfections, by externals. And so in this particular verse, it's explaining that, that's not really relevant. That, whatever the state of the body, it's the consciousness which matters. And therefore, the consciousness has to be focused. Tivrena, they call it. Whatever state of being, akama sarvakama va, mokshakama udari, tivrena bhakti yogina, judita parasham param. And what does Tivrena mean? It means full concentration, full meditation. And another explanation for Tivrena means a focused light, like a laser. You know, a laser beam is so focused it can cut through steel. So, you know, devotional service is so powerful by this focus that we can cut through our attachment to this material world. So it's all dependent on developing that single-pointed focus or that single-pointed meditation. What's that verse? In Extra Instruction, there's a nice verse. I think it's the eighth verse. It talks about the process of meditation. It breaks it down. And it says, first of all, there's smaranadasha. In other words, there's remembrance. There's a little bit of endeavor to remember. This is the beginning. So, you know, like hearing and chanting in the very beginning. Smaranadasha, they call it. And then there's Varanadasha. Varana means when we actually hear enough, we become convinced about the process and focused. And our attitude towards life changes. We become fixed in the process. So I'm sure all the devotees who are here are at least on the end of the first process. And many will probably be well situated in Varanadas, we're convinced. But then, you know, the meditation is anusmriti. Anusmriti means it's broken. Sometimes we remember Krishna, sometimes we don't. So this is, you know, when we're actually engaging in the process, this will become more focused, more to the point of Tivrena. And the next point is called, I forget what they call it actually. First is meditation. Now there's remembrance, constant remembrance. Constant remembrance means we're actually, Krishna is in the mind in some way, shape or form, constantly. And Prabhupada gives us some clue that, you know, a devotee, when he sees anything, it reminds him of Krishna. Like a parent, when he sees the shoes of the child, the child may be at school or somewhere else, but he remembers the child. He says then that becomes more focused and actually becomes meditation. You start meditating on Krishna. And then that becomes absorption. Sorry, it's absorption in remembering Krishna. Then full meditation on Krishna. And that full meditation then leads to complete absorption, which is samadhi. So it's a scientific process. And the reason I'm going through this is because this verse is talking about how, you know, Narada Muni left his body. And it was, you know, we hear about, you know, devotees want to leave the body in Vrindavan or in an auspicious circumstance. But they don't always do that. Is that right? We see, you know, there's this COVID-19. But Bhakti Maharaj left his body, according to, you know, that calculation, in the most inauspicious situation. You know, but that's not the point. The point is what was his meditation? So it doesn't matter where we leave the body, how we leave the body. It's irrelevant. It's the actual focus at that time. And if we're training now to be focused, it doesn't really matter. Bhagavad Gita explains that an ordinary yogi, he wants to calculate when he leaves his body. He doesn't want to leave in the dark moon fortnight, when the sun travels to the south. He wants to leave in the light at an auspicious time, Abhijit star. He said, Prabhupada rounds it all up. He says, this is all just like, you know, a waste of time. Because it's actually Krishna, we have to please Krishna. So the devotee is pleasing Krishna. It doesn't matter when he leaves his body. So this is the reality. I can give a story to, actually, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, I think he did preaching in Nigeria. I'm not sure, he probably went to Ghana as well. Is that right?
All right. Yes, he was preaching in Nigeria and Ghana, in West Africa, generally.
Oh, very good. You know, he's one of the most elevated souls has been in the movement. And when he left his body, he actually wanted to actually leave in the Gita Nagari farm. I was told this actually, that he said that I want to show that it doesn't matter where we are, if we're in Krishna consciousness, we go back to Godhead. We don't have to worry about that. That was his specific reason for doing that. So regarding meditation, you know, even an impersonalist, if his meditation is focused on the you know, the Brahman aspect of the Supreme Lord without deviation, he becomes unaware of the body. Trying to get comfortable. He becomes unaware of the body. Therefore, you know, even Socrates, I think we all know the story of Socrates, is that right? Socrates, he was challenged. I don't know exactly what they were trying to accuse him of, but they said that they'll like say kill him. He said, you have to catch me first. He knew he couldn't be killed. And he actually drunk hemlock, he was so convinced. So it's possible to be so convinced that we're not the body. So that's the whole point, is, you know, bodily consciousness means another body. Spiritual consciousness means a different destination, spiritual destination. I remember once I went to a place in England for a vacation. This was before I actually joined the movement. I don't know whether anybody's heard of Blackpool. It's not a very auspicious name, but anyway, that's a place where, you know, people used to go for the sun. I mean, it's not like Ghana in England. You know, it's like wherever you go in Ghana, the sun, I assume. But in England, it's like, you know, there's about 3 months of the year when there's something like sunshine and it gets above 20 degrees centigrade. And so, you know, everybody in this country, they take advantage of that situation. They go on a vacation to hopefully absorb the sun in between the clouds, of course. And so I was there, and I stayed in one residential, you know, for holiday makers, and I noticed there was this old gentleman, you know, very erect, but he wasn't so tall, but he was stout. And every morning, 7 o'clock in the morning before breakfast, he used to go down walk about 2 miles, 1 mile down the seafront, what they call the promenade, and 1 mile back. And so one day I had a chance to speak to him, and I said, why do you know, you're very determined to walk every morning. Is it for your health? He says, well, that's part of it. He says, but there's a whole story behind it. He says, I can tell you if you've got time. I said, yeah, please tell me. He says, well, I used to be a sergeant in the First World War. And my particular service, or my particular duty, as they say in the army, was to walk down, was to take of soldiers or a few soldiers behind enemy lines. I think they call it reconnaissance, is it? You know, they have the binoculars and they, you know, they camouflage and they go the indiscreet way. He says, and we were on one reconnaissance and we were spotted by the enemy. He says, so, you know, what do you do when you're spotted by the enemy behind, you know, you're well behind enemy lines? So they all turned and they just started running. And they were running and running and running. And I think everybody can appreciate, you know, when you're in that situation, the mind's not deviated from the goal. You know, your life's at stake, the enemy are after you, and somehow or other, you have to just keep going and focus on where you want to be so that you're safe. So, you know, Tivrena, the sergeant was focused and all his men were focused. So they came at one point while they were running, they came to this 5-bar gate. And, you know, they opened this gate to let the cattle in out of field. So they didn't have time to open it. They just leaped over it, or, you know, scrambled over it. And so the sergeant got over and he started running. Then he looked back and he saw there was one private. And due to fear, he'd froze at the fence. He just couldn't move. And so he had to make a quick decision, and he decided to run back and just help it. And he ran back and he go over the private and pulled him over and kicked him up the backside and said, run. But by that time, the enemy had actually come close. And, you know, while he was running, all of a sudden he had a huge explosion behind him. And he didn't even bother to look back to see what it was. But it was very, very close. It nearly blew him off his feet. And so he just carried on running. You know, it was like in samadhi. And there was nothing actually else entering his mind. So eventually, you know, they arrived. They'd got behind their own lines. They were safe. And so then his meditation started to become unfocused. You know, he started seeing the scenery around him and everything. And then he actually started to get some feeling in his leg. It was all wet. And he looked down, it was covered in blood. And when then they had to carry him to the hospital. When he saw that, he collapsed. When they took him in hospital, the doctors examined him and they said that half his calf had been blown away. And they said, you know, there's so much damage there that we'll have to amputate your leg. And he said, you're not going to amputate that. He said, I've just run 3 miles with that. He said, you should save it. And so they operated on him and they saved his leg. But he never felt a thing. Can you imagine how much pain he should have felt? He didn't actually feel anything until actually he focused back. And so this is what we're talking about, meditation. It's how meditation takes us out of this world even. And so he was walking down the promenade every day to keep that leg healthy because he only had half a muscle. And other damage also. But anyway. So, yeah, meditation. I was making the point about it's not what we are doing or where we leave our body or how successful in service we are even. There could be indications. And far too often we get caught up in that misunderstanding that, you know, we're doing so much. But, you know, what are we thinking about? This is the whole point, is that externally, we change everything when we take to devotional service. We do a 180-degree change, but the mind doesn't do a 180-degree change. And that's the hard work. You know, because Krishna, what does Krishna see? Krishna's, you know, Antaryami is the super soul in the heart. He understands everything about our mentality. So actually we have one garden in Bhaktivedanta Manor. This is the temple on the outskirts of London. And it was this place that George Harrison, in the early days, he bought for the Hare Krishna devotees. There was just too many devotees in the center, or the temple in the center of London. So, you know, he actually bought the one on the outskirts, a huge manor house, so that devotees could actually have somewhere to stay. And so then eventually in 2001, George Harrison left this world. And so we created a garden in remembrance with all different slogans and statements on the way around. One statement is that of George Harrison was that the way Krishna sees, he says, I see the heart. I see what's in the heart. So George Harrison understood that. you know, to an external person, he was actually a gross materialist, still engaged in doing so many things. You know, I went on the internet and read a little bit about him when it was his disappearance celebration. And, you know, he was very, very focused on writing. So he wrote over 300 records. Most of them were actually devotional ones. And the prominent ones made big hits. But he did so much preaching. He had very little association. He was a very elevated soul. And when you hear those lyrics in his songs, they're really focused on the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And so Krishna sees the heart, George Harrison said. And also this is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita also. Ananyas chintyanto mam ye gyanaha pariyapasate tesham nityabhayuktanam yoga kshema vahamyaham. And Krishna is saying to those who are dedicated to meditating on my transcendental form while they're actually doing service, and they're doing it with affection, to those devotees, I carry what they like. They may not be perfect. They may not be perfect in so many ways. But he says, I carry what they like, and I preserve what they have so that they can build on it. And this is backed up by Bhagavad Gita 9:30. Apichet sudaracharo bhajate mamananyabhak sadhu eva samantavya samyak vyavisahiso. Sadhu is sadhu, even if he commits the most abominable act, if he's actually determined to carry on serving. So this is very auspicious for us, because it's not where we think we are, you know, because a devotee will never think he's advanced. It's where Krishna sees we're at. So a devotee's meditation is that whatever I'm thinking I'm achieving, my only work is to remember Krishna. And I'll never think I'm remembering him enough. So this is good, because if we're still trying to actually focus in that way, then Krishna actually will make up the difference, this verse says. So, you know, this is why we can't tell who's a pure devotee. We can't tell, you know. He may be seemingly doing so many things due to his conditioning. But if his attitude is correct, then Krishna's pleased. You know, yes, you know, we've all heard the story of the cobbler and the Brahmin. Has everybody heard this story?
Yes, Maharaj.
Yes. Yeah, but basically what this story is, it's saying the same thing. You know, Narada Muni spoke to both the cobbler and the Brahmin. The Brahmin was Paka. He was very expert in doing everything very nicely, expert in understanding the Shastras. Well, actually not so expert in understanding the Shastras. And the cobbler was just a simple person. And he asked them both. They both asked him where he was going, and they said, oh, please ask Lord Vishnu when I'll get my liberation. And when he arrived there, Lord Vishnu says, tell the cobbler he'll come back after this lifetime, but the Brahmin left to wait many lifetimes. And Narada Muni was scratching his head, he couldn't understand. He said, why is that? He says, well, they'll both ask you what I'm doing, what I was doing, obviously, when you go back. See their reaction. And so when he went back to see the Brahmin, he told the Brahmin it'll be after many, many births. And the Brahmin, what? I'm so expert in everything I'm doing. I'm sure this is actually a mistake. He said, anyway, what was Lord Vishnu doing? He said he was actually threading Vishnu had told Narada Muni to tell him he was threading the elephant to the eye of a needle. And he said, nonsense, nonsense. So then, Narada Muni understood. He's got no faith. He looks at what they call it, the article, the real thing, but it's not. And then he went to the Brahmin, anything but the real thing. And when he told the Brahmin that, he was studying the elephants with a iron needle, the Brahmin was ecstatic. He said, "Oh, my Lord is so wonderful. He can do anything." So anyway, I always take great heart from this because, otherwise, Brahminical standards and, is a long way away. I mean, we are actually working at it. You see what the Brahmins do in India. It's like, Prabhupada said if we followed that program, we'd never get out of the bathroom in the morning. But, Prabhupada, by that one statement, he showed that this actual externals there actually have no consequence. What did Prabhupada say about this? He concluded, he says that some way or other, we have to fix our mind on Krishna. Smartavyam Satatam Vishnu. He says in Shastra, Smartavyam, always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. This is the essence of all Shastra. And that's why we chant the Maha Mantra. That's why the yogis, they go to the forest, they perform yoga to meditate on the Super Soul. So we're doing the same thing. The yogis, they meditate, is what's those two words? I forget what they are. They're in Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter. There's two kinds of meditation. I'll just find it for you. Maybe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There's two kinds of meditation. One is where we perform work. And yogi, it's not that they go to the jungle or in the Himalayas and they sit down and they sit down for a week straight away. Does that sound feasible? They've got no idea about yoga. They go straight to the jungle and straight away they become a great at asanas. No, they actually go there and they do some practical service. And then, they'll sit down for half an hour and perform the activity. Then after a week, they'll sit down for an hour and then eventually they can sit down for a day and meditate. And eventually they become really focused. And then, it moves to a next level, meditate. So in the beginning, there's work. And in the end, there's actually focus. But with this process that we've got, it's both. It's both work and focus. I was going to lead on to something else. I forgot what it was now. Anybody remember what I was talking about before we go into the Ashtanga yoga? Anyway, it's gone again. Yeah, so meditation. We have to get that higher taste. Even Jad Bharat, he got the higher taste. He was on the platform of Bhava. But, he lost his meditation. He went on his own in the jungle, 24 years old, emperor of the earth. Who can give that up? Beautiful wife, children. Everywhere he goes, people are bowing down. Very difficult to give up that sort of adoration. But, he was so advanced, he went to the forest. But because he wasn't actually in association of others, he became deviated. He started focusing on a little baby doll and became absorbed in that. So much so he took birth in another family. So, Shastra's telling us it's an internal process. It's not an external process. And Vishaya Vinivardhante, Neharashidenam, Raso Varjam Rasopyasya, Param Drishva Nivardhate. Param means supreme. Drishva means taste or vision. If we get that higher taste, then, we're safe. In the beginning, it says we don't have that taste, but we do it anyway. And then eventually the taste comes. Param Drishva. That's what we're looking for. Then we're on the safe side. Then it'll come to spontaneous devotional service, not just rules and regulations. Anyway, the whole process is described in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, sorry, the first canto, second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if we actually read that second chapter, we can actually understand the whole process of devotional service. Now, eventually, this process, we become so focused that it cuts the knot of material attachment. Our process is positive, not negative. Our process is not to try and negate everything. This is actually an impersonalist process. Our process is to make the endeavor not to do the wrong thing. If we engage in doing the right things, it takes care of the wrong things. So, the process is to be always engaged in Lord Krishna's service. And if we're always engaged in Lord Krishna's service, then there's no room for anything else. And automatically, the higher taste develops just due to absorption. Just like Prabhupada gives the example of if you've got, a full glass of milk, and we try to pour some ink in it, we keep pouring the milk in as well. The ink can't stay. It can't be contaminated. So, whatever we're doing, we have to have the mind engaged. Like this pandemic, I don't know what it's like in Ghana. Is it pretty strong there?
In Africa, generally, it's there, but it's not very strong like Europe and America.
Yeah, because it's so hot there, probably. I don't know. Or maybe it's not so sinful. Most people, you've got one or two cities and that's it. In England, it's like in so many cities. Anyway, it's strong here. I think there's last time I read it, about 3 or 4 days ago, there were 70,000 cases a day and about, 1,300 deaths a day. So, it's like difficult. But reason I brought that in is because, I've been locked down in this temple in Manchester for like 10 months. And for the first 9 months, there was nobody else in the temple. So, this is a good verse for me to actually read because, I better actually control the meditation. You don't see anybody. Actually, I look forward to Wednesdays. What happens on Wednesdays? The dustbin men come. Do you have dustbin men in Ghana? They call refuge men. They collect the refuge. And that's my association for the week. I go out and talk to them. Anyway, it's not that bad now. Now there's another devotee in the temple. So,
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Yes, we have Kusha Prabhu wants to ask you a question, Maharaj.
Oh, go on then.
Krishna Maharaj, I have my humble obeisances. I have 2 questions.
Oh, okay.
My first question is the mother of Sukadev Goswami. You mentioned he was in the womb for 16 years. He did not come out. So who is this mother? What austerity has she performed for a woman to carry a child for 16 whole years? The scripture never talk about her glories or her past austerities. Do you have any idea who this woman is in the previous life? Why she was able to do this?
I don't actually. I've never really thought about it. I mean, it is actually a good point. There's so many scriptures which explain these things. And reason to do this, they make it exciting so people read them. It's like these soap operas. Everybody on a certain day in the week, there's a certain program and they all tune in, it's like it floods I don't know about television, but it's probably more internet now, but it used to flood the television. There were probably more viewers at that time. In India, they had Mahabharat. There used to be so many, every time it finished, one episode, it left on a cliffhanging question. Da-da-da-da. You know? So, you know, people are interested in intrigue, violence, you know, argument. And so everybody tunes in. So this is the same thing, is that, you know, Sukadeva Goswami's mother has probably got a whole story behind it, which everybody will be interested in. So it's good to actually, you know, to tell stories and know where to think. But the real essence is to understand the philosophy, you know. So although it's good to actually understand this, and then we can actually give a background to people when they ask. Anyway, I'm covering up for myself. I don't know. I don't know. I probably could if I thought about it, but I can't even remember her name. Anybody know?
The wife of yesterday, but we didn't know. Nobody, they didn't say so much about him.
It was who? Who was it? Sorry?
Wife of yesterday.
I know his father was Parashuram, and you know, he met Satyavati in the middle of a lake, and he copulated, and then, you know, Vyas means island born, but I just can't remember who he married. And then, of course, anyway, the point is, it seems I'm probably a devotee, almost 100%. It says when Krishna appears in this world, he appears with his entourage. So, you know, it's like a whole entourage of living entities come from both the spiritual world and from the higher planets to engage in Krishna's Leela. And Krishna arranges Leela with all these different stories. One story leads to another, just to come to the main point, like the Bhagavad Gita. In the Mahabharata, what's the essence of Mahabharata? You know, everybody's like really captivated by all the intrigue and everything on the Battle of Kurukshetra. Then all of a sudden, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, you know, Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna just before a great battle. Now, I'm sure before that great battle, everybody's tuned in to watch the battle. So this is the way Krishna actually works. And that's what we have to do also. Learn the art of drawing people in and then subtly giving them Krishna consciousness at some point. Prabhupada did that. There's one racing driver. They call him Graham Hill in the 60s. He was a world racing car driver champion for many years. And Prabhupada was speaking to him. And, you know, first thing Prabhupada did, you know, they were looking under the bonnet of his car. And Prabhupada took great interest in his racing car. And Prabhupada said, I used to have a car. And he started talking about the car. You know, and Graham Hill, this race, he was in ecstasy. And then after you know, about an hour speaking about his car, Graham Hill said to Prabhupada, he says, what do you do? So then Prabhupada started preaching to him. Anyway. So
thank you, Maharaj.
yeah, anyway.
My second
question, yeah, sorry.
My second question is on the Bhagavad Gita. You mentioned 930. Apichet Susudacharo Bajante Mama Nayabak.
Yes.
Sadhueva Samantavia Yavyam Yurasito Hisa.
That's right.
Even if one commit the most abominable actions, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated. So my question is, in devotional service, when someone have these so-called fall downs or mistakes, why don't we see them, consider them saintly, because they are still engaged in devotional service? Why do we still condemn them?
Well, you know, it depends on the individual. Krishna's giving an instruction for everybody to be careful. That, you know, even when we see somebody do something really, I mean, I'll give an example. I can't remember which acharya it was, but in the Bhagavad Gita, there's one acharya comments on this verse, and in his commentary, he says, even if he actually has sex with the wife of his guru, something to that, or he's doing something similar, really, really degraded example it gives. And he actually picks himself up and it's an accidental, then we should, Christian's making an extreme example that, if somebody takes up devotional service again, then help him. Don't knock him, The point is, he's been in the material world for millions of births. So he has a temporary fall down and we actually kick him back into them millions of births straight away. No. We actually are very open and we create a rehabilitation for that devotee, even if he can't fully take the devotional service. We actually keep him connected in some way, shape or form, if it's possible. I was telling one story the other day. Makela was a Prabhupada disciple and she was telling one story to me and a few others before she left the body about quite a while ago. And she said she was in a temple where Prabhupada was visiting and one fallen devotee visited that temple. And when Prabhupada heard he was there, he said, "Oh, bring him to see me." And Makela, I don't know, anyway, one of the temple devotees said, "But Prabhupada, he's blaspheming all the devotees even now." Prabhupada said, "Bring him to see me." He said, "He's eating meat, Prabhupada." He says, "Tell him to cook for me." You know what I mean? It's not necessarily that we go so near to them if they're in a bad condition, but we keep tabs, and when we feel the time is right, we can try to help them. We should be positive. They may need punishment. They may need to actually live outside the association of devotees, but we don't wash our hands completely of that situation. And, he was away for quite a few years. So what to speak of somebody who has a mishap, he's performing devotional service. One devotee was telling me that in the Gaudiya Mat, they've got a particular farm in Orissa. And, the devotees live there. And if a sannyasi falls down, they send him there for about a year or two to actually engage in devotional service without any pressure. And they bring him back. So, this is really opening up. The devotional service has very tight scheduled, not scheduled, but very tight parameters. But the mood of, bringing people within those parameters is very, it's like a loving relationship. And once somebody's within those parameters, even if they actually fall away, we don't forget them. The parameters are there to keep us actually fixed in devotional service. Not to actually choose who shouldn't practice necessarily. Anyway, I've said a little bit. I don't know if there's any more questions from anybody. Meditation. So anyway, we can stop there if not.
Sadi Prabhu wants to ask you a question, Maharaj.
Okay. I have to go in 5 minutes, but
that would be okay, Maharaj. 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for listening.
Maharaj, I have one quick question. It's a lecture a devotee gave. And this devotee was saying that this human body we have, as we have today, is so contaminated that we are unable to perform bhakti yoga with this material body. So my question then was, what then are we doing? What did Srila Prabhupada give us? Because as I understand, Srila Prabhupada gave us bhakti yoga. So I wanted to get your
I can't really understand the question because your accent's very strong. I didn't pick everything up. Maybe if somebody else would just...
Maharaj, he mentioned that a devotee gave a class and he said we cannot practice devotional service in this
Yeah.
material world with this body, not in this material world with this physical body.
Okay.
So he need your idea or your opinion on that, because Prabhupada engaged all of us in Bhakti Yoga.
Yes.
So why is this devotee saying we cannot practice Bhakti Yoga with this material body?
This is the first instruction of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's explaining that sadhana bhakti means using the body in devotional service. How can we, we have to start using what we've got to serve Krishna. We've got this body. So this is actually explaining that if we carry on using that body in devotional service, the body changes. It changes, it becomes, it's actually looks like a material body, but it's acting in devotional service. It's not a material body. It's not being used in a material way, therefore it's spiritual by nature. And to the degree we're actually absorbed in the service, then it's actually a spiritual activity, and it's a spiritual activity. It's devotional service. And then, eventually we're so focused, all our activities are spiritual. So when this body is actually finished, this verse is saying that activity will immediately carry on in a spiritual body. But it's not that before that spiritual body comes, we weren't performing devotional service. Of course we're performing devotional service. Devotional service has nothing to do with the body, it's to do with the soul, it's to do with the focus. That means that, when Krishna's devotees come to this world and they acquire a material body temporarily, that they can't perform devotional service. Is that right?
That means this devotee who is preaching this is not ISKCON philosophy, because he is saying that we are really not engaged in Bhakti Yoga, because it's not possible in this world until we leave this body.
No, it's possible. Prabhupada was engaged. Many devotees have been engaged in, through history in this world. So how can we go back to Godhead if we haven't been engaged in Bhakti Yoga here?
That's the question.
Yeah, we have
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
I know you said you have just 5 minutes, but in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 30, I think 33, 34, 35, Krishna was telling Arjuna that for one who is being honored, dishonor is worse than that. And this is like a silent thing in ISKCON where devotees oftentimes commit suicide. We have one devotee, I won't mention the name, but we have one devotee who just committed suicide. So sometimes a devotee may go through a situation which might cause him some sort of disgrace, and he feels that being shamed is worse than death, and so he's going to take away his life. Can you please speak to us as to why we do not have to think that way and commit such abominable act?
Why should we take his life? If we made a mistake, we carry on with devotional service. What good will we get from taking the life? We're taking away our facility for serving Krishna. We have to actually carry on whatever we've done. The thing is that, we feel disgraced, and we feel that, it's our perception is that how can I serve Krishna now? How can I face the devotees? But, what difference does it make what people think about us? If we've done the most abominable thing, it's actually because we may have a material conception, and we want to be seen as a devotee as well. As we want some recognition, and that when we do something really wrong, it busts our bubble of who we think we are, and it's like false prestige. So it's very, very difficult. But But still, we have to see that. I mean, Bhishma Dev, he was actually on the wrong side. He was fighting against Krishna. And, you can understand what people thought about him, especially when Draupadi was disrobed. But Krishna was in Bhishma was in Krishna consciousness, even though he was being, he wasn't seen as being very pious for his. He actually was Krishna conscious enough to carry on. He knew he was serving Krishna. So, Krishna doesn't actually. Krishna's positive. He's all positive. Whatever we've done, he never forgets. And even if we do the wrong things, all we have to do is start doing the right things and associate with the right people. We've done a lot more than what we can do in this lifetime, in many lifetimes. We don't know what we've done. So, we have to help the devotee. When somebody, that's what I'm saying earlier, if somebody actually falls onto difficulty and there's a abominable act, we should help him. We should give him association as much as possible and lift him, and Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Really appreciate your time. So we want all the devotees to please submit themselves. Let us appreciate Maharaj by chanting one Hare Krishna Maha Mantra.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Santaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.
Gaura Premanandi.
Yes.
Very good.